Yes, now it's time to greet you all. Very, very welcome to this evening with two interesting lectures from Professor Gilboa from the EPD Forum. He will later explain what this organization is and also present himself. It's the Sweden-Israel Friendship Association who arranges this evening together with the EPD Forum. And Professor Gilboa will speak about two subjects. First is about the EU, United States and Israel. And he will lecture for about 40 minutes, and then we have around 20 minutes for questions and answers. And then we stand up for a few minutes. And the next lecture is about Syria, the future of Syria from an Israeli perspective. And also there, about 40 minutes lecture, and then questions and answers. So, we are very happy to greet you. Welcome to Sweden. It's a long time since you were here, you just told us. Very welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm happy to see all of you here. I'd like to thank Lotta and the Swedish-Israel Friendship Association for the invitation to come to here and to share with you some of my views about what is happening in the Middle East today. First, I'll say a few words about this organization, then about myself, then I'll speak for half an hour, maybe 40 minutes, then I'll be very happy to answer your questions. So this organization we established about 5 years ago. We referred to a number of Israeli scholars who felt that Israel is not well understood, to say the least, in many countries, especially in Western Europe and the United States. If you depend on the media or even on the academia for balanced and in-depth information about Israel and the Middle East, you will not get it. There's too much distortion, misleading information, sometimes complete lies about what is happening. So we decided to engage audiences in Europe and the United States about what is happening based on our research and analysis. So we established this organization. It is an educational, academic, non-partisan, non-political, non-profit. We do not subscribe to any particular ideology or party or politics. We do not represent the government of Israel. Sometimes we criticize the government of Israel, but we don't make it our business to only criticize Israel, something that a few governments do all the time. You don't have to be specific. So it's an academic organization. We go to countries in Europe and in the United States, and we talk to audiences. We create dialogues based, again, on our research and analysis. We speak about facts, and we leave interpretations for the audiences and perhaps for other people. And we try to be as objective as one can be in academic research and analysis. We have visited cities and places in the United States and the former Eastern Europe, and now we are trying for the first time Western Europe. It hasn't been easy for us. We have what to say, but sometimes we don't have audiences because they don't want to hear what we have to say. So it's not easy. So this is the organization, and this time we are coming to Sweden. I am accompanied by another professor from Tel Aviv University, who is an expert on Islamic studies. He is the head of Islamic studies in Arabic at Tel Aviv University. I myself come from Bar-Ilan University. Something about our program. So this is our program, and you can find some information about us This leaflet, which you are welcome to take in the break that we will have in between my two lectures. Something about myself. I am a third generation Israeli. My forefathers came to Israel in the middle of the 18th century, and we established a village in the country. So I cannot be told all kinds of false things about the development of Israel and the Arab-Israeli conflict, because I've seen it with my own eyes. I studied international relations at the Hebrew University, then got a PhD from Harvard University in the United States. I've been teaching at the Hebrew University as well as at Bar-Ilan University, international relations and international communication. And I'm holding another position, academic teaching position, at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. So I'm dividing my time between the United States and Israel. My areas of research include United States policy and the Middle East, American-Israeli relations, as well as another field which is public diplomacy. So this is about public diplomacy. And I've written many books and many articles. I'm here to speak about two issues. One is the United States, the EU, and Israel, and the second one is going to be on Syria, what will happen in Syria in the foreseeable future. So I'll start with the United States, the EU, and Israel. And obviously, the way to do it is to compare American policy with EU policy. Now, in the last 2 years, American foreign policy and American-Israeli relations have been shaped by Donald Trump. I know that he is not popular here. And I'm not going to make any comments about his personality or style. This belongs to my professors of psychology. But I am prepared to talk about his policy. So I'm making a distinction between the person and his policies. During the Obama years, United States and the EU and many European countries held very similar opinions about Israel and the Middle East. With Trump, it has completely changed. Europe, the EU, stayed where it was during the Obama years, but Trump completely revolutionized and completely changed American foreign policy in the Middle East, including American-Israeli relations. American-Israeli relations is only part of the problem, or part of his foreign policy. So we have to look at his wider ideas. He is being described as an erratic person who determines policy based on the time he wakes up in the morning and the kind of news he watches on Fox News or CNN. And that he is not that consistent and contradicts himself all the time. But on the Middle East, I think one can identify certain patterns of policy. And he completely changed American policy, first and foremost on Iran, then on Israel, Israeli-Palestinian negotiations, Syria, and international organizations. Completely change it. So presidents like to change policies when they assume power, so that they would not be blamed for continuity. They want to do their own things. When it comes, for example, to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, Trump said he wants to produce the deal of the century. For many politicians and policymakers, they use the term agreement. He's a businessman. So he is using the term a deal. The problem is that negotiations in business and in politics are very different. Therefore, the whole idea of a deal is problematic, especially in the Middle East bazaar of negotiations. But he wants to demonstrate that he can succeed where all his with all other American presidents failed. This is just one example. So we'll talk a little bit about about the changes that he introduced into American foreign policy in the Middle East and American-Israeli relations. The EU is represented by Federica Mogherini. She's presenting herself as the foreign minister of the EU. She's not, but she's a spokesperson for the EU. And when I follow her statements, I see the same thing kept being said time and again. And it seems that the EU has not been able to adjust its basic foreign policies based on dramatic changes in the entire region. Let me give you an example of last Saturday. Last Saturday, Rouhani, the president of Iran, said, Israel is a cancer in the Middle East that should be removed or destroyed. And this is not the first time that Iranian leaders are making this kind of statements. And we have learned as Jews that when a leader makes such statements, better believe him based on our history during the Holocaust. And they keep repeating it time and again. And on Saturday, after he made that statement, at the same time, Israel demolished a few illegal housing in the West Bank. So what Federica Mogherini said, she didn't say anything about Rouhani and about his statement. What she had to say is that she condemned the demolition of those houses. And the United States strongly criticized Rouhani. So here you see the beginning of a difference between the EU and the United States. So let me take you now into some of the questions, some of the issues that now divide the EU and the United States. So first of all, there is this basic approach to the Middle East and to Israel. For the United States, Israel is a very strong ally, and it has been a strong ally for decades. Many American presidents, including Obama, said that Israel is the most reliable U.S. ally in the Middle East. For Europe, this is another matter. Israel is not considered an ally. Sometimes it is considered as a burden on the foreign policies of European countries. And Trump has even elevated, even strengthened the special relationship, which I have written a whole book about, between the United States and Israel. So this is a major difference between Europe and the United States. He changed the whole approach to Israel. Europe, the EU, stayed where it has been now for many years. Specifically, then, we need to talk about several issues that now divide the United States from the EU and Europe. But I need to say something about Europe or the EU. Henry Kissinger used to say, I don't know what the EU is. I want the phone number of the EU. I can't find it anywhere, the phone number. Because the EU is not made of one piece. And we find differences especially between the former Eastern European countries and the West. And even in the West, we find some differences between and among countries. Nonetheless, we can still generalize about the EU as far as those statements and policies that come out from the mouth of Federica Mogherini. So I'd like to begin with Iran. Iran is the number one issue in the Middle East for everybody, except the Palestinians, maybe. But it is not the main issue for Europe. For Europe, still, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the number one issue. I was in Brussels about a year ago. The only thing they were interested in is when Israel will sign peace with the Palestinians. What will happen with peace with the Palestinians? I don't know if you noticed, but in Europe, the negotiations with the Palestinians are called the Middle East peace process. They still use it today. But 2 years ago, there was a conference in France about Israeli-Palestinian negotiations, and the title was Middle East Peace Process. Now, this is highly misleading. It creates the impression that this is the only conflict in the region, and if it is resolved, then the whole region will become the Garden of Eden. And obviously, this has never been the case. And if you need more proof for that, look at the so-called Arab Spring, which became an Islamic winter. Because it's very clear that many processes in the region have nothing to do with Israel or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Turns out that much of the confrontation, much of the violence, in hundreds of thousands of lost lives, are between Muslims and Muslims, Arabs and Arabs. 700,000 people were killed in Syria. 700,000. And half of the Syrian population became refugees. What the world had to say? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. This is ridiculous. When Europe awakened, when those refugees, when Erdogan of Turkey allowed these refugees to go into Europe, he wanted to punish Europe for the actual refusal to admit Turkey into the European Union. So 1 million refugees went to Europe. Suddenly, Syria and Iraq and the violence became important issues. So what I'm saying is that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is important for Israel and the Palestinians. It is not the most important issue in the entire region. And there are other issues. And the most important one is Iran, then Syria, then civil wars. There are civil wars today in Yemen, terrible civil wars. In Yemen, in Libya, still in Iraq and Syria a little bit. These are the most important problems because they are the source of much of the violence and the killing in the entire region. And Iran is then the number one threat to stability in the region, and I'll speak about it when I discuss the second issue about Iran. But still, I want to show you a few things that are important. This is the Iran nuclear deal. So Europe and Obama, under the leadership of Obama, negotiated that deal. And the deal was very controversial. And all kinds of assumptions have been made about this deal. So today, we do not have to speculate anymore. I can tell you from my own research that many of the assumptions that were made by the Obama administration, and I know because I was in Washington, talked to many people, many of those assumptions were proven wrong. The number one assumption was that the deal will open up Iran for Western influence, Many companies are going to come to Iran. $120 billion were released from frozen assets, from frozen accounts. Iran will use the money to improve the economic conditions in Iran, and then it will open up Iran to the West. Iran will modify its aggressive behavior in the entire region. The moderates, Rouhani is considered a moderate. The moderates will get the upper hand over the radicals. Never happened. Never happened. Iran used the money for violence, terrorism, military interventions in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, and other places. And the people of Iran in recent months have shunted in Tehran. We don't want you to spend that money on foreign adventures. We want the money to be spent in Iran. But that didn't happen. Another thing that didn't happen were experiments with missiles. This was left out of the agreement. I never understood why it was left out of the agreement. The UN resolution, which approved the nuclear deal in 2015, said that Iran would not develop and test missiles. There was an addition that could carry nuclear bombs. So Iran says, oh, we do not develop and we do not experiment with missiles that can carry nuclear bombs. But everyone with little knowledge about missiles know that this is not the case. That these missiles are developed or could be developed, or there is some rationale to develop them only if they carry nuclear bombs. So there's a clear violation of part of the agreement. And I think that even in Europe now, even Europe agrees now that this is a problem. This is a challenge that has to be dealt with. So let me show you a few things. So this is a missile so I'm referring here to very close collaboration between North Korea and Iran. So this is Hwasong-10, which is a North Korean missile. It is on parade in Pyongyang. I visited several times South Korea. And I told them, you see this missile? It will end up in parades in Tehran. Not only that, the technological infrastructure of Iran is much better than that of North Korea. So the missiles are going to be improved and go back to North Korea. And these missiles were built for nuclear weapons and only for nuclear weapons. And guess what? This is how the same type of missile is on parade in Tehran. They called it Khomashar. And then these are all kinds of experiments with missiles. And look at this. This is a statement made in January 2017 by Javad Zarif, very shrewd foreign minister, was educated, got his PhD at the University of Denver. And he said, Iran will not use, you see it up there? I cannot show you that with my pointer. Iran will not use ballistic missiles to attack any country, right? So this is one voice. Here's the action, not the voice. So this was on September 3rd, 2016. Iran tests ballistic missiles carrying the message, Israel must be wiped out, both in Persian and in Hebrew. You can see on the right, see the missile on the right? See here? It says in Hebrew, Israel must be wiped out. And at the same opportunity, Iranian officer says that the missiles have been designed to reach Israel. What do you do with this? You close your eyes, don't say anything. It's okay to do that. So you say that Israel should be destroyed, then you develop missiles, and the next step is to develop nuclear weapons. There's no question in the mind of many people that this is exactly what Iran wants to do, and received a license to do so by the Iran nuclear deal. So after 3 years, one has to reconsider. So what Trump did is to cancel the deal and to impose tough sanctions on Iran. 2 waves of sanctions. The second one was just imposed I think it was on November 5th, this month. And these sanctions were imposed on Iran's oil and gas industry. What Europe does? Trying to undermine the sanctions. Circumvent all kinds of sanctions because the EU believes that the Iran nuclear deal was good, that there are no problems with the deal, or if there are problems, then the deal should not have been cancelled. But it's quite obvious that the deal left all kinds of black holes that have to be addressed. And even European leaders say, for example, with missile experimentation, that this is an issue that has to be addressed. So how this issue is going to be addressed? Iran is not going to do it on its own. And Iran came to the table of negotiations in the first place only because of severe sanctions. Now these sanctions, these American sanctions, are not going to be as effective as the others were, because the others were adopted by the UN, and Russia and China also participated in them. Nevertheless, Trump is telling European companies, you have to make a choice. Either you deal with us or you deal with Iran. So European governments are telling these companies, oh, don't worry. We'll compensate you. We'll find ways that you would not lose by coming out from Iran. But these companies believe Trump much more than they believe their own governments. And so this is an issue that strongly and viciously divides Europe from the United States, the EU from the United States. But this is another issue that I want to mention. This is just the EU. Turns out that the EU is engaged in a massive effort to delegitimize and undermine the elected Israeli government. I'm not happy with many policies of this government, the present government. Although, when it comes to Israeli-Palestinian issues, one can say, okay, Netanyahu is not that much interested in peace. But there were other governments in Israel run by the left, and they couldn't go anywhere either. So it's not just the Israeli government. In any event, what you see here, huge investments of the EU and specific countries, including your own country, in all kinds of organizations declaring themselves to be human rights organizations. But in fact, what they do is to undermine the Israeli government. So all kinds of organizations that even say that Israel should not exist, delegitimize, demonize Israel, inside and outside Israel, are supported by donations and contributions from European countries and from the EU. This is unacceptable. I could not find any example in contemporary international relations where a political unit, a supra-political unit like the EU and European countries, including embassies in Israel, that make such an effort. It's unheard that kind of thing could even exist. And we found, I don't have now time to go into this, but believe me, there's a huge challenge for Israel to deal with that investments, millions of euros going into so-called human rights organizations. Some of them are, but most are not. And this is another thing that the EU has been doing, labeling, which is boycotting goods from the West Bank. This was adopted in September 2015. So you can argue about it. the EU can say, okay, we do not recognize Israel's control over, say, parts of the West Bank, not all of the West Bank. Israel really controls only 60% of the West Bank. 40%, the major cities, most of the Palestinians are controlled by the Palestinian Authority. But the problem is that Israel is always selected for special treatment. And this is unacceptable. You cannot adopt double standards. Here I have a list of places where you have, so to speak, occupation. Kashmir, since 1947, China, Tibet, Turkey occupies northern Cyprus since 1974. Turkey is an EU potential member since 2005. Morocco, Western Sahara. Morocco has a special agreement with Europe. Russia, Crimea. Where are all of those? Why don't see labeling that? If Israel is selected for special treatment, this is what we call the anti-Semitism. And it's unacceptable. International organizations, which is an issue in itself. So Europe is very strong on international organizations. And for Obama, support for international organizations, the UN agencies, was an important element of his foreign policy. But Trump has changed all of that. And he's changed all of that because of American interests, but also due to his understanding of the discrimination, double standards, hypocrisy that prevail at the UN itself and other UN organizations. Israel is the most discriminated against country in the UN and the UN agencies. There's evidence for that. It's not something that I'm making it up. It's the Security Council, General Assembly, and all kinds of UN agencies, such as the UN Committee on Human Rights, Commission on Human Rights, UNESCO, even UNESCO. All of those organizations are making tons of resolutions against Israel, and in comparison to no resolutions for other countries. Like almost 50% resolutions the General Assembly adopts every year are anti-Israel. 50% of the whole resolutions. And if you look at the UN Human Rights Council, the committee before, Human Rights Council, first of all, this is a joke. Because you have to look at the countries that participate in this council. Most of these countries are the greatest violators of human rights in the world. Like, you want to see them? This is China, Cuba, Venezuela, Congo, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Qatar, champions of human rights in the world. They are there. There are a few European countries there which accept and go along with every ridiculous and outrageous resolutions that are made against Israel. But this is especially outrageous. There's one Article 7 just on Israel, and one Article 8 for the entire world. Like almost 70% of the resolutions here are against Israel. This is unbelievable. So American presidents went along with this. Trump said, not in my time. So he is ambassador to the UN. It's pity for us that she resigned from that position, Nikki Haley. Day in and day out, criticized the UN Security Council, General Assembly for being hypocritical, for adopting standards that no other country is called to abide by. This is the Security Council and the General Assembly. Right now, just a few weeks ago, the General Assembly made resolutions about Israel as if nothing happened in the Middle East. For example, there's a resolution called for Israel to give back the Golan Heights to Syria. This was repeated even in the last 4 or 5 years. See, Bashar al-Assad murdered 700,000 people. And he's complaining about Israel violation of the human rights of the Druze in the Golan Heights. And countries vote for this, including European countries. This is unacceptable. So this is a list of you see, so from 2006 to 2015, you see, resolutions against Israel at the UN Human Rights Council, 62 against Israel, 59 for the entire world. Does it make sense? And this is another place, UNESCO. Terrible place. This is a decision that was made on October 13, 2016. This resolution says, UNESCO, right, says that all of the holy places in Jerusalem are Muslim only, are Palestinian only. Some European countries abstain. I found that to be astonishing, because if the Jews have nothing in the holy places in Jerusalem, there is no Christianity. But they so much cave in to Palestinian manipulation that they went along with us without thinking. There was another ridiculous resolution made by UNESCO about the Cave of the Patriarchs in Hebron, Palestinian only. So Israel had to fight that by itself. Come Trump, and Trump says, number one, these are not acceptable. Number two, I'm not funding you anymore. Number three, I'm getting out from you. You are so ridiculous, I don't want the United States to be there. So he took the right decisions about these ridiculous, outrageous international organizations. But Europe plays the game. No problem. With all of these huge violators of human rights, Europe goes along with that. Votes time and again for absurd resolutions of the kind that I've just mentioned to you. Finally, briefly, I'll talk about Israeli-Palestinian negotiations. So Trump has turned the table on the negotiations. I must say that for me, it's quite interesting to note that Obama was the friendliest American president to the Palestinians. But during his time, there was the least number of negotiations. There's a paradox here. And so, for me, it meant that the Palestinians don't want negotiations. They don't want really a peace agreement. I don't think they want even a Palestinian state. And I have my own way of telling you why this is the case. But Europe is telling us, number one, get out from the West Bank. Number two, dismantle all your settlements, take out all the settlers, and establish a Palestinian state, and you will have peace. The only problem with that approach, and I'm hearing it all the time, and I am sorry to say that the Palestinians were given two opportunities to show that they are interested in peace. One is the Oslo process, and the second one is Gaza. They want to focus on Gaza. Why Gaza? Because what Europe is telling us to do is exactly what we did in Gaza. Dismantle all the settlements, cut out all the settlers, took out all the military, and we were told Gaza will become the Singapore of the Middle East. Like the most flourishing political unit in the region. What we got? We got Hamastan. They suffer. The people of Gaza, 2 million people, really suffer. They are poor and they suffer. 50% unemployment. But who's to blame for? Hamas's budget is about $300 million. What do they do with the money? Roads, factories, education, health. No. They build the military, they build rockets, and attack tunnels on Israel. $300 million every year. They got a chance to prove that they can rule a peaceful entity on the border with Israel. They do exactly the opposite. So who is telling us to do the same thing in the West Bank? And who can guarantee that what will happen in the West Bank is going to be exactly like Gaza? Who can guarantee that? So, comes Trump. Trump told the Palestinians, first of all, he put the blame for the absence of negotiations on the Palestinians. Europe put the blame on Israel. He put the blame on the Palestinians. Then he transferred the embassy to Jerusalem. Then he cut funding for the Palestinian Authority, saying, I'm giving you about $450 million a year to engage in negotiations. You're not doing it, no money. And where the money goes of the Palestinian Authority, it's another issue in itself. So he cut funding. And then he said, what is this agency for refugees operating in Gaza and the West Bank? It's called UNRWA. Instead of rehabilitating refugees, it provides, it permanently ensures that this will continue to be refugees forever. And there's another agency of the UN for all the refugees in the world. They do the right job. This one the wrong job. They cut funding for UNRWA. What Europe does, step in. So the money that Trump took from UNRWA, the EU and European countries are now trying to fill up. And what is this? Undermining American policies and attempts to bring the Palestinians into negotiations, to show them that the time is not on their side. And I think I'm out of time. Maybe I spoke too much. So thank you for coming and for listening, and I'll be happy to answer your questions now. Who is going to moderate?
Thank you so much, Professor Gilboa. Is there any questions here? Okay, a hands up here.
Thank you for a nice presentation. I just have a question. I mean, I think all who are here now, can you hear me? Everybody who's here, sitting here, I think agree with Trump in the sense when it comes to his Middle Eastern policy and the bias the world has shown against Israel and so on. But I mean, he has also a lot of other strange ideas about the world and say the climate impact on so on. And this has caused a split or a division and maybe sort of between, let's say, the party and the Republicans. And Trump will not be there forever. So how do you see the future? Has he sort of very pro-active Israeli politics in the future, may that shift so that the Democrats, if they come back in power, become even less positive to Israel?
Okay. So first of all, I would have preferred Obama to adopt the same policies. Or even 50% of what I said, if Obama had adopted, would have been better. But I already made a distinction between his personality and his policies. I'm also making a distinction between his policies in the Middle East and other policies which are much more controversial. Now, I think Israel has a huge problem with the Democratic Party in the United States. Part of it has to do with the not just Netanyahu. Yes, Netanyahu infuriated the Democrats by opposing Obama on Iran and about Israeli-Palestinian negotiations, and he went to Congress and criticized the president on Iran. But this, I've investigated this, and I found out that the Democratic Party went to the left, too much to the left. And my interpretation of Trump's success is that, in part, this is a response, a reaction to the Democrats going too much to the left. Now, I can tell you that what will happen in the next few weeks in the Democratic Party will determine the future of the party, as well as the chance for the Democrats to change their policies toward Israel. There is a huge fight now between the radical branch of the Democratic Party and the center, and the center of the main straight center of the party. The radicals are saying, we won the House of Representatives, we should have our candidates to confront Trump in the next 2020 elections. But the center says, no, you have no chance to win the presidential elections. Now, pay attention to the election come January, because the new Congress will start in January. Who is going to be elected the Speaker of the House? If Nancy Pelosi gets it, the more moderates win. Somebody else who is supported by the radicals will win it, and it's another story. Wait another year to see who is going to capture the Democratic presidential nomination. Now, I think that there is a crisis between the Democratic Party and Israel. And the more Israel is associated itself with Trump, the worse is the relations with the Democrats. And this is also a problem with the Jewish community in the United States, because 70 to 80% of the Jews vote for Democratic candidates. I think that the Israeli government has to take this into consideration. I'm not saying that from now on the Israeli government should attack Trump on every policy that he does. But I think that it needs to build bridges with the Democratic Party, and the American Jewish community should provide that kind of a bridge. This is a major deficiency in the Israeli government that has to be addressed. I've been writing about it and talking about it in my radio programs, television programs, and as of yet, I have not seen adoption of that course. But maybe Israel will be forced to do it if the radicals win. Then perhaps another approach will have to be adopted.
Okay, thank you. I had another question here from the gentleman here.
My name is Ted Goldberg, American living in Sweden. I think I know about America, and I'm a little surprised that you're emphasizing Trump as a human rights person.
I did not say that.
Well, what you were saying is you're saying that he is supporting human rights, and that I think you have to put in that he's a businessman, and if he is supporting Israel, I believe it has to do with business. It has more to do with money. Because if you look at Trump's human rights record in the U.S., if you see what he and his party are doing to blacks, to minorities, neither he nor the Republicans are particularly interested in human rights. I wonder if they're Democrats at all, if they believe in a democratic system. I think not. And so I would sort of say, what does American policy towards Israel, what kind of business, what's the business behind it? What's the money in it? Because that's what interests Trump. That's my opinion.
Okay, first of all, I did not say that Trump is a human rights person. He is far from that. But he went against the UN Council on Human Rights. This does not mean that he is a human rights person. There's no connection here between the two. Going after the UN Human Rights Council does not mean that you are yourself a champion of human rights. And I tend to agree with you about his record in this. Now, I don't know if I could attribute much of his relations with Israel to business. But I think you can make much better business with the Arab-rich countries, especially, say, with Saudi Arabia. I'll talk about it and the Persian Gulf states. I'll talk about it a little bit later on Syria. But if you want to find some business rationale, so I can tell you that Israel is a very small country with 8 million people. But we have startups more than Britain, France, and Germany combined. Number 2 in the world after the United States. So if you talk about innovation, high-tech startups, like I think we are number 1 in the world in cybersecurity, which is huge. We just had a few weeks ago a visit by the number 2 person in China coming to Israel. What he was after: technology, innovation, sustainability. You can make a case, and the Israeli economy is very strong, one of the strongest economies in the world today. I can only imagine if we had peace, we could have been one of the richest countries in the world. Richest, because we still invest a lot of money in defense. So, I don't know. Trump has never invested in Israel. I think he bought a piece of land. One time he bought a piece of land and he lost money on it. And I know that particular place. But he didn't do business in Israel. And I agree that he is a businessman and his approaches to politics and foreign policy are driven by economic considerations. I think the trade war with China is part of it. I don't know I don't know if he is really with regard to Israel, that he's really motivated by money. I don't know. I cannot really prove that.
Thank you so much. Is there any more questions? Here we have a lady.
My name is Diana Schwartz. I know that his son-in-law is Jewish. Does that have anything to do with it?
Yes, there is a rise in anti-Semitism in Europe, in your country, but also in the United States. American Jews blame Trump for that. Like the Pittsburgh recent massacre. The Jewish leaders attributed this to Trump and his tolerance of extreme political movements, organizations, and people. Now, so he says, how could I be responsible for anti-Semitism when I have in my own family we have Jews? But the biggest anti-Semites would say, many of my best friends are Jewish, as if to say I could not be anti-Semite. But when I hear that many of my friends are Jewish, I know that you are an anti-Semite, and you only conceal your behavior or your ideas by saying so. Now, I don't know if this is an advantage. I think that I happen to believe that when you have too many Jews in the American government and people don't like the government, then they are motivated to be anti-Semites. So for me, for example, I would have preferred to have an American ambassador in Israel other than David Friedman, or to be the chief negotiator for the Palestinians, somebody else than Jason Greenblatt. Jews. But it's not up to me. So it's a double-edged sword. That on the one hand, you have sympathetic ears. On the other hand, they are constantly blamed for being biased, one-sided. So it's more difficult for you to mediate. And this is what the Palestinians are arguing all the time. Jews are running the game, but I think the Palestinians say so because they themselves are anti-Semite, and they think that everything is that the Jews control the whole world. Incidentally, I need to tell you, I lecture, and sometimes I advise the Chinese government. And I found that they use anti-Semitic statements. Like the Jews control Washington, the Jews control the entire banking system. These are classic anti-Semitic statements. They are not anti-Semites. They are not. But they say statements that sound like. And so I'm making a distinction between when Europeans say that, you know that this is an expression of anti-Semitism. When Chinese say that, without knowing the meaning of it, it is not. But you can find statements like this in China, Japan, India. Any other questions?
Is there any more questions? We're going to have a 10 minutes breaks, but I think we can have one more question if someone has it.
I can promise you that the next
Have
lecture is
one
not
here,
going to be as long.
back. A young gentleman here.
For everybody who wanted a break. My name is Magnus Wickberg. Just this short question about Trump. Does his policy on Iran and Israel stems from a genuine understanding of the problem in his, or is it just that he wants to be like anti-Obama?
Okay, first of all, he wants to be anti-Obama. But this is not just unique for him. You know, as I said earlier, presidents like to depart from the policies of their predecessors. But I think he believes, and he said so many times, that this was a bad deal that has to be corrected. You can argue with the way he does the correction. But I think, my judgment, this was not a good deal. It was not a good deal. Obama could have done much better. And I think that Europe has no idea about what is going on in Iran and what Iran wants to accomplish in the Middle East. I'll say a few words about it in the next lecture. So if you want me to divide his motivation between opposing Obama and a genuine interest in dealing with Iran, I cannot do that. But you know, if you want me, if you force me, I'll say maybe 25% Obama, 75% the merit of the case. These decisions are complicated. I don't believe in a single explanation of anything. There is no such thing. International relations processes are extremely complex. The tendency in Europe is to oversimplify everything, to say, okay, it's this, and only this. No, it doesn't work like that. It's this, and this, and this, and this, and sometimes this is much more important than this. So it's a tough question for political scientists to answer, because we don't have like a Geiger machine to gauge these kind of things. So I think we can end this session. I promise that you will leave on time. So I'll make my next presentation shorter and take a break now.
We can take a break now in 10 minutes.
If you want information about our programs, you can take it.